I've built rockets that explode, companies that nearly died, and products the world said would never work. I've stood at the edge of failure more times than success. And I want to talk to you about faith, not the kind you borrow from slogans, but the kind you need when life feels deeply unfair. Let me ask you something honestly. When things fall apart in your life, do you believe there's a reason, or do you feel like the universe is random and indifferent? Tell me in the comments what you believe right now, not what what you think you're supposed to believe. Life is not fair. That's not a motivational quote. That's a fact. Biology isn't fair. Physics isn't fair. Markets aren't fair. You can work harder than everyone else and still lose. You can do the right thing and still get punished. Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't actually built anything meaningful from scratch. I've watched rockets fail after years of work, thousands of people involved, and nearly all the capital I had on the line. That kind of failure doesn't feel poetic. It feels humiliating. It feels unjust. And in those moments, optimism alone is useless. What matters is whether you still believe the effort has meaning. Faith, to me, isn't about pretending everything will be okay. It's about believing that truth exists, that progress is possible, and that your actions matter, even when the scoreboard says you're losing. That belief is not emotional, it's strategic. Without it, you stop trying. And when you stop trying, you guarantee failure. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose because they lack talent. They lose because repeated unfairness convinces them the game is rigged, so they emotionally check out. They stop thinking long term. They stop taking responsibility. They trade faith for cynicism, and cynicism feels smart, but it's actually a slow form of surrender. When life feels unfair, your brain looks for shortcuts. It tells you to blame the system, the economy, your past, or other people. Sometimes those factors are real, but the moment blame replaces agency, you've handed over your future. Faith is choosing agency anyway. I've learned that reality doesn't reward intention. It rewards persistence aligned with truth. You don't get points for believing. You get results for acting as if your belief demands effort. If you say you believe tomorrow can be better than Uruguay, what are you building today? That question matters more than any motivational speech. There were moments when continuing made no rational sense, when investors walked away, when experts said the math didn't work, when failures seemed statistically inevitable. The only reason to keep going was a conviction that pushing the boundary of what's possible is worth the cost, even if you personally lose. That's where faith lives, not in comfort, but in commitment, not in certainty, but in direction. Faith is deciding that your life is not just a reaction to circumstances, but a deliberate experiment aimed at something larger than your fear. If life feels unfair to you right now, I'm not going to tell you it's a test or that everything happens for a reason. Sometimes chaos is just chaos. But meaning comes from what you choose to do next. You can either let unfairness make you bitter or let it sharpen you. Ask yourself this tonight. If the universe is indifferent, what kind of person do you choose to be anyway? Someone who withdraws or someone who builds? Someone who complains or someone who creates? Your answer to that question quietly determines your entire future. When people talk about faith, they often confuse it with comfort. Real faith is uncomfortable. It asks you to keep moving when the evidence is incomplete and the odds are unclear. It demands patience in a world addicted to instant validation. And when life feels unfair, patience feels almost insulting, but it's still necessary. Here's something most people don't want to hear. Progress is not linear, and suffering is not evenly distributed. Some people get lucky early, some never do. That's not morality, that's probability. But probability doesn't get the final word unless you quit. Time is the variable most people underestimate, and faith is what allows you to stay in the game long enough for time to work in your favor. I've learned to think in first principles, not just in engineering, but in life. Strip things down to what's actually true. If something is hard, that doesn't mean it's wrong. If something fails, that doesn't mean it was pointless. Failure is data, pain is feedback. The problem is that when life feels unfair, people stop collecting data and start telling themselves stories that make them feel justified in giving up. Discipline is the bridge between belief and reality. You can say you'll believe in a better future, but if your daily actions don't reflect that belief, it's just noise in your head. Discipline doesn't care how motivated you feel. It only cares whether you show up. And when you show up consistently, even under unfair conditions, you create optionality. You create chances that didn't exist before. I've seen incredibly intelligent people self-destruct because they couldn't tolerate delayed results. They needed immediate proof that their effort mattered. But the universe doesn't work on human timelines. Rockets don't obey hope. Physics doesn't care about your emotions. You either respect reality and keep iterating, or reality ignores you. When life feels unfair, the temptation is to lower your standards, to say, this is just how things are. That's a dangerous lie. The world changes because a small number of people refuse to accept the default setting. They decide that even if the process is brutal, the outcome is worth pursuing. Faith is choosing a long-term vision that outlives your current pain. There were nights when the pressure was unbearable, when the responsibility felt crushing, and the margin for error was zero. In those moments, I didn't rely on inspiration. I relied on structure. Wake up, solve the next problem, ignore the noise, repeat. That's not glamorous, but it works. Faith without structure collapses. Structure without faith becomes empty routine. You need both. If you're struggling right now, ask yourself a hard question. Are you reacting to life, or are you designing it? Reaction feels easier in the short term, but it traps you in cycles you don't control. Design requires effort, patience, and belief that your decisions actually matter. That belief is the quiet engine behind every breakthrough. Unfairness doesn't mean you're powerless. It means the problem is harder, and harder problems tend to produce more meaningful outcomes if you're willing to endure the process. Most people want the reward without the wait. Faith is accepting the wait without knowing the reward. There's a moment in every difficult life where you face a fork in the road. One path is resentment, the other is responsibility. Resentment feels justified when life is unfair. Responsibility feels heavy. But only one of them gives you leverage over the future. I've never seen resentment build anything meaningful. I've seen responsibility change outcomes that looked impossible. Taking responsibility doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that goes wrong. It means recognizing that your response still belongs to you. You may not control the starting conditions, but you control the trajectory from here. That's not philosophy, that's physics. Small forces applied consistently over time create massive change. Purpose is what transforms suffering into fuel. Without purpose, pain feels pointless. With purpose, pain becomes part of the process. When you know what you're aiming for, endurance stops being heroic and starts being practical. You don't wake up asking whether today will be fair. You wake up asking what moves the mission forward. I believe the most dangerous belief is that your life is insignificant. Once you accept that idea, effort feels optional and integrity feels negotiable. But if you assume, even temporarily, that your choices matter more than you realize, everything changes. You take your time seriously. You take your work seriously. You take your words seriously. When things go wrong, most people ask, why is this happening to me? That question has no useful answer. A better question is Given that this is happening, what's the smartest move now? Faith isn't asking for guarantees. Faith is committing to intelligent action without guarantees. I've learned that meaning isn't something you discover, it's something you decide. You decide that building, learning, improving, and contributing are worth doing even when recognition doesn't come and results lag behind effort. That decision simplifies life. It cuts through confusion. It gives you direction when motivation disappears. If life feels unfair to you right now, don't waste energy wishing it were easier. Use that energy to become stronger, clearer, and more disciplined. Use it to build skills that compound. Use it to create something that didn't exist before you showed up. That's how you turn unfairness into advantage. Faith doesn't remove doubt, it gives doubt boundaries. You can question outcomes without questioning your commitment. You can feel exhausted without abandoning the mission. That's what resilience actually looks like, not constant confidence, but consistent action. I'll leave you with this thought. If you look back years from now, you won't measure your life by how fair it was. You'll measure it by what you chose to do anyway, when things were hard, when the odds were bad, when quitting made sense. Faith is staying in the arena long enough to matter. If this message spoke to you, carry it forward. Not as inspiration, but as instruction. Build something, improve something, take responsibility for something, and remember, even in an unfair world, purpose is still a choice.